Today is December the 10th, 2019. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I'm in Stillwater to talk with Larry Caldwell, a retired, semi-retired uh, person who has been spent a lot of his or most of his life career in conservation, with 41 years with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and 10 more with the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. So this interview is going to be part of the Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. So thank you for letting us come today.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with learning a little bit about your childhood and your parents.
Well, I was born in 1950 in northwest Iowa. My parents were very special people, hard workers, very friendly, helping people out. But farming was probably as far away from what you would think that they would get involved in. My dad's father was a pharmacist, and his dad died when my dad was 5 years old, and he was the oldest of three kids. And my grandmother, his mother, never remarried, and she raised those three kids by herself in Cherokee. She was a seamstress at a hospital. And you think back in those days, that was during the Depression, and they had a hard time making things meet. But he graduated from high school there. My mother, her parents immigrated from Germany when my grandfather was 12 years old when he came over, and they settled in northwest Iowa. And when he got older, he was a farm laborer. He just went wherever the work could be found. And we'd figured out with my mother at one time, before she graduated high school, she had lived in at least 13 different houses. They just moved to wherever the work was. So they both were in the same class and graduated together. When after graduation, he went into the Army, and they got married when he was home on furlough at one point in 1946. And when he was discharged, he didn't have a job, whatever, and he'd grown up in town, never grew up on a farm, but his uncle had a farm to rent. So he rented the farm to my dad. Dad didn't have any experience whatsoever with farming, had no farming equipment. They rented it and didn't have any money, so they rented it on a sharecrop basis and used his equipment. And through the GI Bill, I guess they had there was a number of people in that shape. So every Thursday night, they'd go to a town about 30 miles away to go to farm school. And they did that for about 6 or 8 months, where they just take different topics and learn how to be a farmer. So they lived there for about 3 years, then moved up to a farm up in the same county, but on the north end of the county up around Sutherland, Iowa. So that's where my growing up days were. I stayed there from kindergarten through graduation.
What did he farm?
We had a farm of 240 acres. And to think of raise a family with 3 kids on 240 acres. It was primarily corn and soybeans, pasture. We had hogs and cattle and chickens and cows, and just a typical small farm at that time. It was a real close-knit community where everybody helped each other out. When you'd bale hay, they would come in and help bale hay and cut silage. Everybody would just go make the rotation. Our whole world was about 10 square miles in that area. And we'd have potluck suppers every month. We'd have card parties, usually twice a month, where they'd go to different places. All the kids would get together. We all grew up together. It was just a real close-knit community there. It was a nice background.
And do you remember when the first time you drove a tractor?
Yes, I was 7 years old. Our neighbor had a Ford Ferguson tractor, and that's when I wasn't that big a kid. And the other tractors we had, my legs weren't long enough to push the clutch in, but on a Ford Ferguson, you could just stand up on it and push it straight down. So he let me drive that around. That was really cool. And then I remember the first time my dad let me drive home from our neighbors. We were up there doing something, and he got me started on the road heading to our house, and he took off. So I remember that to this day. It was on a Farmall H tractor. And I thought, boy, you can't get any cooler than this. This is.
And he was ahead of you or behind you?
He wasn't anywhere.
went
He just let me go.
Wow.
He put it in third gear, so it wasn't very fast. But
Did your mom know that you were doing that?
she did when I got home. I don't know if they had a discussion after that or not, but I sure remember that day.
So did you have siblings?
Yes, I had an older sister and a younger brother. I had a sister who's 3 years older than me and a brother that was 9 years younger than me. So
Did she get to drive the tractor too, your sister?
she wasn't a whole lot outdoors, but we all had chores and we all had stuff to do, so she would do her part. When I don't know if this was intentional, but she was disking one day and she didn't turn quick enough and she disked out about 200 feet of fence. And after that, she didn't have to go to the field work very much.
So what were some of your chores?
Get up every morning before school and we'd go out and feed the cattle and feed the hogs. And when I was real little, I'd just help Mom gather the eggs from the chickens. But there was always something going on every morning and night for getting the chores done before we go to school. And that was in northern Iowa, and it'd be colder than the devil. And the things we'd always have heaters under the automatic water fountains, but they would inevitably blow out with a high wind, and then the fountains would freeze, and you have to carry hot water out there to thaw them out. And that was just part of life up there.
So how far was elementary school from the
We were
farm?
about 8 miles. We rode the bus, and a couple of years there, we'd be the first ones to be picked up and the last ones to be dropped off. It'd be about a 45-minute trip by the time the bus went around the neighborhood to get everybody there. So we'd usually get up like 6 or 6:30 in the morning, do chores, and the bus would be there at 7:30, and then get home in the afternoon and do chores and homework. And that was, thinking back at it, that doesn't sound real exciting, but that was what everybody did, and that was just life at that time.
What was the name of the elementary school?
It was Southern Elementary School.
Okay, and then on into high school?
High school was right there too. They built a new high school while I was there, but it's just a block away. So, and they're still there today, but the elementary school has been converted to senior living apartments, and the high school is converted to a stained window shop where they make stained windows.
Not enough kids in the neighborhood to support a school, or they have
No, in fact, they just kept consolidating. And in fact, today, the Southern O'Brien County school system was our entire football conference. At that time, there were 7 schools when I was there. We played football against. Now they've all consolidated into one one school. So
what year did you graduate from high school?
Graduated in 1968.
68. Did you have a favorite teacher?
Yeah, there were several. We were blessed to have a good school system. Our kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Martin, taught for like 40 years, and she'd have 2 or 3 generations of kids. And she was just a sweet lady. And second grade teacher was Mrs. Sweeney. They were ones that just took a lot of interest in the kids and really encouraged you all the way up. And there were just several teachers throughout there like that. We had a really good school system.
Well, in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Math, science. That's what English. It was not, but it was the math and science.
At graduation, did you have some idea of what you might want to pursue?
Yeah, we didn't have money to. I knew we couldn't get into farming in there, but liked agriculture. That's all we had known. And I was planning to go to Brookings, South Dakota. They had a good ag school, and it was not that far away. But our graduating class, we were just starting to consolidate at that time. We had the largest graduating class in the history of the school. We had 42 people, I believe. And 11 of them were going to Iowa State University in Ames. And I figured they must know something that I didn't, so I applied to Iowa State also and ended up going to Iowa State.
Planning to do what?
I put down on the ACT test, that ACT test, you have to put down the schools you want to go to, and I put both Brookings and Iowa State. And then I put agriculture as number 1 and engineering as number 2, and figured it out when we get there. So.
Well, then engineering, did you know much about what that would
not
entail?
a thing, not in the least.
Buddy's doing that too, or?
Yeah, some were. The other was 3 of my friends that was going into engineering, so I figured they knew something I didn't. So.
A little bit of math, I guess.
And enjoyed math and wanted to be involved in agriculture. And it was a fateful decision there. That there's so many things when you look back of things that just happened that you didn't plan on, but then when you look back, you find out that there's quite a milestone of for your career and life and everything that just by chance almost. And then the thread of people throughout your career that really helped you along, and you really don't appreciate it or realize it at the time, but when you look back, that was very important. And in April, I think it was April of my senior year, we'd already sent the ACT test and that to Iowa State, and we'd been accepted to go there. Got a postcard in the mail, and it said that they had a brand new program that they were just starting, and it was called a cooperative program between Iowa State University and the Soil Conservation Service. And I found out later they were trying to grow their own engineers before they graduated. And it said that if you're interested in agriculture and if you want to be an engineer, we could have a summer job for you in your home county. And so I immediately wrote back and said, I'm interested in agriculture and I want to be an engineer. And I got a call about a week later saying they offered me the job in the local office in Cherokee. And at that time, it was paying $1.75 an hour. And we were only making $1.25, $1.50 baling hay out around the neighborhood. And it was, they even had air conditioning in the office, believe it or not. So that was a no-brainer. So I graduated from high school on a Friday night and started with the SCS office and county office on Monday morning and never looked back.
And I guess the reason you got the postcard was because you had
Applied for Iowa State for agriculture and engineering.
Yeah.
And it was the very first year that they had tried this. This was a new program that they had tried. And there was 2 of us that year that they had selected. And Phil Smith was the other one. And he went on with NRCS. He just retired about 2 years ago. So he moved on up through the ranks. And then the next year they had 2 more people. And both of those went with NRCS through their entire career. And they have now since retired. So it turned out to be, it was an excellent program. It was a 5-year program. So you'd work in the summers and they'd move you around to different locations. I was in Cherokee in the field office that first year. The second year I was in Mason City, which is north central Iowa, on a survey crew. The next summer I went back to that same location, working on design work. The next year I went to Audubon, which was an area office where you'd work on design of small dams and conservation practices down the southwest part of the state. And then the last 2 years I was in the state office. I was in the design unit for one stint and then went with Watershed planning for a stint. So after when you graduated, after you had 2 full years of experience in a variety of locations, that most employees, it would take 5 years to get that same experience by the time you move people around. But so you got to see different parts of the state, different types of aspects of the job and engineering, and work with different people. And they put you in locations where they're good trainers and really good with people. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but in that first office in Cherokee County, the entire staff, that was the only people that was in those positions since the beginning of the agency. All 3 of them started out with CCC days and CCC camps, and then SCS came around in 1935. He was Harvey Lindbergh was a district conservationist, and Glenn Kraft was a technician, and Gladys Schroeder was a clerk. And they had been there since the day that the office was formed and opened, and they were still there. They retired the year after I had left. But that was I didn't appreciate that at the time. And then all the other places we went were just good trainers. They would put you to the engineers. They were really good engineers, good with people, good trainers, and it was just an opportunity that was perfect, that just came out of the blue from that postcard that started.
Was there a mentor that came out of that bunch that stayed with you, followed you through?
Oh, we kept with them, but it turned out this Gladys Schroeder was one of the clerks, and she ran the office down there. Turns out she was my mother's classmate in high school, and they kept communicating and all, and she passed away here about 3 years ago, but kind of followed her through. Don Freevert was an excellent engineer. I mean, just fun to be around, and he knew all the DCs and all, and we kept in touch all the way through the process.
So your experience with watersheds go back to the 5th year or your 5th fifth rotation?
Well, it was even before that. When I was, we lived about a mile from the Little Sioux River, and that was one of the major tributary rivers there. And I didn't realize it at the time, but what it was all about. But they were starting to build a lot of dams around our neighborhood. When I was 8 years old, I would get on my bicycle and I'd get off the bus before chores. I'd get on my bicycle and I'd go to the place where they were constructing the dams, and I'd sit up on one hillside. Just loved watching the dozers and the scrapers and everything build those dams. And even when I was littler, we had a big area, a gravel area between our barn and our machine shed. And when it would rain, the water would come down they concentrated 2 different locations. And I'd go out there in the rain and I'd build little dams across there, and it'd back water up, and you could put your toy farm toys and everything downstream. And then you break the dam and flush them along downstream. It was just great fun for a kid at that age. So.
And early experience.
Yeah, one of them I called the Mississippi River. The other was the Missouri River, and we had the whole thing lined out. I remember Mom getting so upset, come in and just be all completely wet and muddy and all. But that started it all. And it turned out that the Little Sioux River Basin was one of the early watershed projects that the agency had started.
Wow.
And that's when they first started building a lot of those dams that still exist today.
So in college, you were still doing this in the summers?
And then for a few times it was 6 months at a time. You'd go 6 months. When I was in the design unit, I'd work 6 months and go to school 6 months. And that's why it became a 5-year program. So it spread it out. So
that's what I was thinking. So, and you graduated from there in
1973.
73. Okay, then let's go through your career from that point then.
Well, another one of those milestones that were just a happenstance. In 1972, in the summer of 72, there was a national meeting of the Agricultural Engineering Society, and it was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And there was 4 of us that hadn't been outside the state very much. None of us had any money. But we thought, well, boy, this would be good to take off. And we had a thing called annual leave that we'd never figured, where they actually pay you and you didn't have to go to work for a week. So we decided we were going to go to that national meeting. But we didn't have enough money to stay in hotels and that, so we would camp along the way. And we spent about 3 days going down there. We had a good time on the way down. But we'd always stop at the local town. We'd stop at the local SCS office to find out the places to go and do and have fun and camp and all. So we got down to Hot Springs, national meeting the day before the national meeting started. So we stopped in at the SCS office to see where we could go camping and what places to do around Hot Springs. And when we walked in the office, there was this cute girl that was at the desk there, and the district conservationist was in another office. So the other 3 went in and talked to the district conservationist, and I stayed out and talked to this gal. And we were talking, and before we left, we exchanged telephone numbers and all, and we still have those pieces of paper. And we ended up getting married a couple years later. And then, so we were there for that time, and I think we went back to the office one other time about that trip just to say hi. And then that fall, we, the same ones, one different person, but we went down to the Buffalo River to do a canoe trip down the Buffalo River on a 2 or 3 night deal where you camp out on the way down the river. That was in the Wild River for people from Iowa. And we made a huge tactical error. We watched the movie Deliverance had just come out the week before. And we had seen that the weekend before we went down there, and it just scared the devil out of us when we were going down through there. But I thought, well, we might as well go down. We're that close, we might as well go down to Hot Springs. So went down and saw Carolyn, and she lined up some other ones. We had a date for everybody, so we stopped at that point. And we were writing letters back and forth during that time. That was that fall in 72. And then in 73, we kept writing letters back and forth, and Iowa State University played University of Arkansas in a football game. And the Soil and Water Conservation Society had their national meeting in Hot Springs in 1973. So I thought, that'd be a good time to go to the football game and then go to the conference in Hot Springs. So we had it all set up. We got tickets. She had agreed to go, so we were going to meet at the football stadium. So I got there, and she had stood me up. Turns out she had a boyfriend, and she felt guilty. So she so I watched the game by myself. Then I went down to Hot Springs, and we'd had this set up in advance that we were going to go to her place to have dinner that night at her house. And they were still planning to have me there. They didn't realize that she wasn't going yet. So I thought, that's a free meal, and what have I got to lose? So I met her parents without her the first time. And we went, and her grandparents were there, and her aunt and parents. We sat down. We had a great meal, sat there talking for 2 hours or more. And then I left and I said, well, at least I got a good meal out of it. Well, then she started having second thoughts, and girls didn't call boys at that time, but she called her dad and said, do you think it'd be okay if I'd call him to see if we get together while we were down there? And he said, yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. So she called, and then we got together for that trip. I was in 73, and then we kept riding back and forth. And in 74, which surprised us both, her dad let her go to University of Northern Iowa up in Iowa. And 19-year-old girl going to Iowa with this older guy there. But then that fall we got engaged, and the next summer we got married. That was 75. That was 44 years ago. So that's again another one of those happenstance of things that just happened that was quite a great milestone.
It wouldn't have been away for an Iowa and Arkansas.
Who would ever think that? Yeah, that was.
So she graduated from Iowa.
No, she went to Conway, Hendrix University in Conway for a couple years. Then she went up to UNI for 1 year, and she did not graduate. She was 1 year short, and we're always going to go back and get the degree, but then life happens, and kids and traveling and all. But it's
and the Watershed, man.
Yes, so been a good life.
So you got married in
75.
Okay.
That's summer.
And then, so she gets a say in decisions where to move next.
It's very supportive. She would go anywhere. I mean, we'd talk about where we kind of want to go, but at that time you went to where the jobs were, and also I'd been out of school about 2 years by the time we got married. So I was a project engineer on a watershed project in Mason City. It was right on the Iowa-Minnesota border. And it was very unique. It was a PL 566 watershed project, but it was all drainage. It was all large channels and drain tile. That the tile would be put in for mains for the farmers to tie into, because you had to tile the land up there because it was too wet if you didn't tile it. So this would give them an outlet so they could tile their land. And there had been tile that had been put in the 20s, and back then it was a huge project because they'd have their tile mains that would be 18 to 20 inch in diameter. But it drained thousands of acres there. So we put in 65 miles of drain tile, the largest being 54-inch diameter. And we designed that through the system, and then the outlet would go to a channel that we built. And so that was a very unique project, especially in the early 80s. That's about the time that the USDA and the government was against drainage. And in fact, they were trying to develop wetlands, and here we were on a watershed project draining this area. We just got caught in the timing there, but we finished the project, and you go up there now, and it developed some wonderful farmland up in there that wouldn't happen today because of the area. But it was a very unique project, and got a lot of attention, and people would come out to see that and we had opportunity to meet a lot of good people at that point in time.
And learn things there that carried over to the next spot.
Definitely.
So from that position, take us through.
Well, at that point, for a while, you didn't apply for jobs. They would tell you where you're going to go next time. But about that time is when you started applying for jobs. And there was a assistant state engineer position open in Columbia, Missouri. And the reason it was open because the state engineer in Iowa had retired, and the assistant state engineer in Missouri got that job. So he came up to Iowa, and then I applied and got accepted down there. We just switched states. So we moved to Columbia. Both my daughters were born in Mason City. The last one, we had to delay our transfer date to Columbia because she was a little late. So we had to delay it for a month. So she could be born up there, and then we moved down to Missouri.
Well, that's quite a change, though.
Huge change. Yes. Yeah. I don't think it was by design, but I've noticed over our whole career, we went to northern Iowa, which was a huge cultural change and weather change for Carolyn. And we lived in an apartment when we first got there on the third floor, and the entrance was not enclosed. It was exterior steps, and they faced to the north. And there wasn't anything between there and the North Pole, I don't think, to stop the wind coming in. But we had some very, very cold days. Then we ended up buying our first house there, which was quite an ordeal. No one in our family had ever owned a house, and we got this little house we were really, really proud of. But then I've noticed through the career that ever since then we've continually moved south and closer to Arkansas. I don't think that was totally by design, but it worked out well. That each time we get to a little warmer climate, to the point where it's a little bit too warm at times. But Columbia was just a fantastic place to live. We lived in a neighborhood with lots of kids. Everybody was really friendly. We'd be out every night, and we lived on a dead-end street, so all the kids were all playing, and we would all be out in our driveway, and it was just really a close-knit neighborhood. And that was the hardest place we've ever had to leave. It was hard to leave after we were there for 5 years.
What were some of the things you were doing in that job?
We, as assistant state engineer, got involved in engineering program statewide, but worked a lot in the watershed program there. They'd come up with a concept, instead of having some larger dams, they'd build a lot of small dams within a drainage area. And there might be literally 250 small dams in this watershed project. So that was same concept. Watershed program has been basically based on trying to keep the raindrop as close to where it falls. The Corps of Engineers build the big dams down on the big tributaries, and USDA we'd build smaller dams up into the tributaries. But this took it one step further, and we went way up in the tributaries and built a lot of small dams. So that was a new concept that worked through watershed planning and design and construction. We did a lot of work with terraces and put in underground outlet terraces. And I started grad school at that time, and we came up with a new way to design the storage in terraces and tried to get some consistency between the states in the Midwest that were not consistent at all. So we came up with this system that's still used today up there. It's now in the tech handbooks and all for that storage method. That was fun. And there was a new concept for narrow-based terraces that instead of farming the entire terrace or just the backside, it grassed both the front and the back slope, so you didn't have to drive them on them at all. And that was a new concept that we worked with a lot of farmers on. So Hugh Curry was a state engineer, and he was just so much fun to be with, and he would let you do your own thing, and he would make sure to get you involved in a lot of different things. And I just can't say enough about him for all the good things that he opened up the doors to introduce to a lot of people, a lot of contacts.
So you earned a master's there?
I didn't get the master's. By the time I ended up transferring, I had about 12 hours in, I think. And then I said, well, I'll pick that up when I get to the next location. Well,
so at what point did you think, okay, this is going to be my career with the SC?
Oh, that was decided right off the bat. Yeah. When I graduated, they would guarantee you a job. That was another nice thing about the co-op program. I interviewed with the Corps of Engineers, but SCS is a good family-oriented. You're working with farmers. You're out. I mean, there's something about going out and working with the farmer and doing the original survey and design and see it constructed, and then go back years later and still see it's working. When I go back to Northwest Iowa, I still drive by a couple of projects we worked on in that first summer that I was in there, some waterways, and they're still there. It's still functioning just like we said it should.
Well, did your mother and dad finally think, okay, that's playing in the water paid off?
I think so. Yeah.
No,
we were one of the first ones to go to college, and so that was they were proud of that aspect. And then the more that we went around and worked on some of the bigger projects, I don't know if they thought, does this agency knows what they're doing, putting this kid in those spots. I was 29 years old when I went to Missouri as assistant state engineer, which was really young. And then 5 years later, I was 34 when I came to Oklahoma.
Okay, so we're to Oklahoma. Why come to Oklahoma?
Well, it was about the time Hugh Curry was not close to retirement age, and it was been there for 5 years, and it was time to see what else was available. And talked to a lot of people with networking within SCS, National Office and all. So we just started looking around. And there was a job that had opened up, a state engineer in Illinois. We thought, well, they got a good, strong program. It was in Champaign. So we even went to the point, we filled out the application, but we didn't put it in the mail. We thought we'd drive up there one weekend just to see it. And it was a nice college town and all, but it just didn't quite feel right. And we said at the time, I said, God, if God would just send us a sign that this is the right move. And we were joking about that. And all of a sudden it started snowing. We thought, there's our sign. We never put the application in the mail. We just drove home. And then a couple months later, then the Oklahoma position opened up. And that was a long shot because at that time, Oklahoma primarily just promoted from within the ranks in the state. It was unusual to get somebody from out of state. But I really got handed to Roland Willis. He was the state conservationist. And when he first called, he wasn't offering the job. He just wanted to talk. We talked for 45 minutes or so, just life in general and past experience. And at the very end of the call, he said, well, if you'd like it, I'd like to offer you the job. And that was quite a stroke for him to take a chance on somebody outside. I know when we first got here, we'd go to meetings and everything, and people would say, well, I don't recall the name. What part of the state are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Iowa. And then pretty soon you'd notice that they would just kind of go off the side. Yes, they weren't used to having somebody out of state very often. But everybody warmed up and it worked out well.
But you didn't come down and check it out before you decided to, yes, we'll say
no,
yes.
I'd heard Oklahoma had such a good conservation program and watershed program and had such a big piece of history there that this is an opportunity you couldn't pass up. And we'd never been in the state before at all until we came for a house hunting trip after we'd agreed to take the job. That was a culture shock. We drove over here from southeast Missouri. It's all trees, and Columbia just all trees and vegetation. And we drove in northeast Iowa or northeast Oklahoma, and we said, well, this isn't bad. There's trees all over the place. It's really a pretty area. We got to Tulsa, and boy, this is a nice place. We started driving over on Highway 51 over to Stillwater. We noticed that there's getting to be less and less trees as we went. And we thought, my God, if we don't get there soon, there won't be any trees left. And we didn't realize how close that was being true, the 35. And we came in on the west side of town, or east side of town, in Stillwater Mill and the elevator. And they're like, oh my gosh, where is this where we're going to live? But Stillwater turned out to be just a perfect place to raise a family, good school system. The university brings in a lot of activities that you never get on a town this size. And we've been here ever since.
So, and you came here what year?
1985.
1985. So, what were some of the things you did to learn the state?
Oklahoma had, and I'm sure this might be a little biased, but they had absolutely the best engineering staff in the nation. We had people here, all of them were in their 50s or 60s, but Max Dominic and Mavis Jones were the construction engineers. They were out in the field and just supervising the project engineers for construction. Gerald Younger was the design engineer who had designed hundreds of dams. And John Cagle was a geologist. And they'd been here, they designed and constructed more dams during their career than most other states built ever since the program started. And and they took me under the wing. I thought I was running things. I was 34 years old and a young kid that didn't have any of this experience, but they really took me under their wing and they protected me on a lot of things and helped guide me through there. It always struck me that we'd get a call and there'd be a problem with a dam in some location. And they'd find out there might be a seep or something was leaking or whatever. And they would immediately start talking about, oh yeah, I bet that's on the left abutment because when we were digging the core trench, we got into some soft stuff. We thought we got through it, but we must have missed it. And I was sitting back there in the basement that all of them were on the same page, and I'd have to stop them and ask, what part of the state is this dam in? Where's it at? But we were really blessed to have such a good staff that Norm Riker was a soil mechanics engineer, one of the best in the nation. He went to SCS, sent him to grad school up in Utah State, and he was really looked at as one of the best there were. And you get all of that group together, and they had all their career was during the heyday of the Watershed program in Oklahoma, when they were building an average of 2 dams per week for about 15 years. That's huge workload. When you look at getting the easements from the private landowners and going through all the surveys, it was all done by hand and chopping a line so you could see through to get shots with the instrument. Going to the design was all by hand. You look at all the design work that was done. That was just a tremendous workload that I don't think people today understand the sacrifice that it took what it took to get a dam in place at that time. None of the modern survey equipment and computers and all of that, but they just churned them out. For the 1965 was the peak year. They built 160 dams that 1 year
in Oklahoma.
Nationwide, there's a total of 12,000 dams built in the watershed program nationwide on all the watershed programs. But there was a 20-year period from late 1950s up through the 70s, where they averaged one dam a day being constructed for 20 years during that period. I mean, just a tremendous workload that was going on with a lot of engineers, a lot of surveyors, a lot of construction inspectors and so forth. But they're just a tremendous workload to get this system of dams out there and the watershed projects in place that have been benefiting the communities.
Changed the landscape considerably, I would think.
And it wasn't just the dams. I concentrated on dams through my career, but another big piece of this program was the conservation treatment. Before you could build a dam, you had to have the entire drainage area up there under, or 75% of it under conservation plan. And 50% of those planned practices applied. So that brought a lot of conservation work into the state to control the erosion upstream from the dam so that the reservoirs wouldn't fill up with sediment as fast.
And it generally worked?
Yes, for two reasons. One, I think they're a little conservative in their calculations of how much sediment would be delivered to the site. Most of these were evaluated on 50-year life. So theoretically, at midnight on the end of the 50th year, those lakes out there that everybody fished and swim in and everything should be full of sediment, because that's how they were designed, because it was primarily for the flood control. But in fact, most of these dams haven't been filling up as fast. I think part of it was a conservatism that they estimated. The other part is a testament to the conservation treatment, that the farmers did a much better job of conservation treatment than was originally planned, and the farm bills came in to make it some of that more mandatory. But I think it's quite a testament to the conservation program in Oklahoma that the dams are not filling up with sediment as fast as originally planned.
Trying to do the math, if most of them were built in the 60s, and they are reaching that 50-year.
Yes, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Those dams nationwide and in Oklahoma, one dam a day nationwide and 2 dams a week in Oklahoma, at the end of the 50-year period, now we're at that stage, in the middle of that stage, where 1 dam a day is coming to the end of its 50-year life nationwide, and 2 dams per week are coming to the end of their design life in Oklahoma. And in fact, in Oklahoma, there's a total of 2,107 watershed dams were built. And as of today, 1,450 of them have exceeded their design life. And nationwide, the 12,000 dams that were built, this was a milestone year because 6,200 of those have exceeded their 50-year life.
And most of them still doing their job?
Absolutely. That's part of the problem. They call them silent sentinels, where they're protecting these communities. And I would venture to say, and including Stillwater, you go to many of these communities, if you'd walk down the street, most of the people don't even know the dams exist, let alone how they impact their daily life out there. That's one thing that really caught me when it came here, was all the history that is in this state. That talking with some of the old timers, and I mean, you get into some very emotional stories where they would talk about almost on an annual affair, there'd be a flood that would come in, and they were constantly fixing fence, and some of their livestock would be flushed away and destroy their crops. And that was an annual event before these watershed projects came into place. And the people that were leaders in Oklahoma were actually national leaders. The Red Males, L.L. Red Males, was a banker in Cheyenne. And he took it upon himself to really promote the program to the point where he would go to D.C., he'd meet with elected officials. Dick Longmire was another one from Pauls Valley. We've got a copy of a telegraph that it came from the White House, and it confirmed a meeting that he was going to have with the president the next day. In 1953, met with President Eisenhower. And Nolan Fuqua from Duncan, and Mr. Humphreys, Lloyd Church from the Southeast. They were leaders in Oklahoma, but they were also national leaders to get the Watershed program authorized and up and going. And we talked to, I know in 1999, Dwayne Phillips and I interviewed 6 people, some of the older timers out in Cheyenne. And once they started talking, and they were talking about when they were kids and all the flooding that would occur and how that impacted their families and, you know, economically and socially and everything else, that in fact, that's what got me interested in the history of the Watershed program. So it was always the first couple of years, they were just trying to figure out which way was up with all these dams. But you start figuring out how did all this happen. That I think there's an interesting history when you take a look at all the programs. It's ironic, but the beginning of the Watershed programs began during the Dust Bowl days. Where back in the early 30s, you know, you heard all about the Dust Bowl stories and all with just devastated landscape and destroyed the vegetation. But there were still periods of time where they'd have intense thunderstorms that would occur over small areas. And when that happened, there was no vegetation to hold it back, so they would have flash floods that would occur. Between the dust coming in and filling in the drainage ways and the floods that they would have, that would fill them up, it'd fill up a lot of the drainage ways. So the next time it would rain, it would flood even more because it didn't have that capacity through there. So in 1936, there was a Flood Control Act in 1936. That was still in the days of the Depression. The local communities didn't have money to help with the devastation caused by flooding. And there was quite a debate going on that there on what the federal role was for assisting communities on flood control. And there was a lot of debate. Should the federal government get involved in this, or is this a local issue? So in the Flood Control Act of 1936, it was primarily the Corps of Engineers authorization bill. But they included in there they selected 212 projects to study for preliminary studies on flood control. No commitments yet, but just to study them. By the time those preliminary studies went through, they selected 25 of those to do more detailed studies. So, and the debate continued on what the federal role was on flood control. What came in the Flood Control Act in 1944 was the first time that there was an authorization for USDA to assist local communities on flood control. Of those 25 projects that they studied in detail, they authorized 11 of those to be implemented. One of those was the Watershed River Basin in Oklahoma. Okay. One of them also was the Little Sioux River in Iowa. So tying that back, that's why those dams were being built up in the neighborhood when I was a little boy, because they were just in the early stages of development of that. So there was a lot of planning, and look at the agency at that time. They had no experience in building dams. We were a conservation agency. So I thought back many times these engineers just started from scratch. There wasn't a history of how to build small dams and all. And here they started doing it wholesale. And they became one of the premier dam builders in the nation with that experience. In the end, they ended up building 1,140 flood control dams on the Watershed River Basin. And they're still functioning today. But they're getting concerned because they're filling up with sediment. And anything that's man-made and 50 years old or 60 and 70 years old now. But it became obvious that because of the history in here, that of those 11 projects, they were so popular, other communities wanted to get involved, but they weren't authorized. So there got to be even a bigger discussion and debate going on about how could we spread this experience to the rest of the nation. Well, there was quite a discussion on, again, should the Corps of Engineers be the dam builder for the nation, or should USDA assist farmers? And while that debate was going on, there were some that just couldn't wait. And in the Ag Appropriation Bill of 1953, they authorized a pilot watershed program called the Pilot Program. And there was 66 projects that were authorized in 33 states. And those were smaller projects scattered around where they would build basically the same, like just patterned after Bill 34, which was the Flood Control Act 1944. Well, the debate continued, and President Eisenhower was a part of the debate. And he had been out to Oklahoma. In fact, we've got a picture where he was in the USDA building in Washington, D.C., and there was a display set up in the courtyard of that. And it was a display of the Sandstone Creek Watershed project in Oklahoma. And the Secretary of Agriculture was there describing it too. And a few years later, he ended up flew into Woodward, and he invited Red Males to hop on the plane and go to the next leg so they could talk about the watershed program. This same time that Dick Longmire was meeting with the president in 1953 to this discussion. So what ended up, they came up with a compromise. And also another part of the history was Chamber of Commerce of Chickasha had a flooding problem on the Little Washita River Basin. And they had requested a flood control plan both from the Corps of Engineers and from Soil Conservation Service on how to control that flooding. And they gave them a year to come up with a plan. Well, the Corps came up with one large dam, and SCS came up with 34 dams. And the cost on the Corps dam was around $6 million at that time, and the 34 dams were estimated at $2 million. And they ended up selecting the Little Washita River, and those 34 dams have since been built. But there was quite a debate going, and during that time there was a book written by Elmer Peterson in 1954. It's called Big Dam Foolishness. And he really does a good job of telling the story of all the debates that were going on between the Corps of Engineers, large dams, and the USDA proposal for the smaller dams, and all the deliberations that went on during that time. That's an interesting read for that. So that brought us to August 4th of 1954. And that's when the Public Law 83-566, PL 566 law was authorized. And that authorized watershed projects that could be implemented nationwide. And that started the watershed program nationwide. So, and then about 10 years later, in 1962, the Resource Conservation and Development Act, RC&D, bill was enacted. And they had a lot of projects community-wide, but there was a few dams involved in that process, and that program also. So when you take a look in total of those four programs, the Flood Control Act of 44, PL 534, the pilot program in 1953, the small watershed authorization, PL 566, and RC&D, all of those in total is what we call the USDA watershed programs. And in total, they've authorized over 2,000 watershed projects. There's a watershed project in at least one in every state. 12,000 dams were constructed in 47 states in those. Of those 2,000 dams or projects, about 1,271 of those have dams included. And there's about 840 that are authorized that don't have dams constructed in them. They address other water quality issues and others. So, and Oklahoma had a lot of the first. The very first one of those 12,000 dams in the nation was built down at Cordell, Oklahoma, just outside of town. It was on July 8th of 1948. It was dedicated. And just to show the interest there was nationwide, Hugh Hammond Bennett was the chief of the Soil Conservation Service. He came to that dedication. The governor of Oklahoma was there. The military bands were there. This was out in the middle, about 8 miles from Cordell, 6 miles from Cordell. It was on July 8th. It was 105 degrees. And the newspaper account said there was 10,000 people there for the dedication. Mm-hmm. And the planning, I've talked with some of the old timers in there, and the planning for that, between parking, and they had latrines built on one whole area. The ladies' auxiliary had tents set up for serving food and everything. It was quite the event. So that was the very first one. Cloud Creek Site 1 was the one that started this all off. So that was the first. Sandstone Creek Watershed by Cheyenne. That was the first watershed project that all the dams in the project that was planned were constructed. So between 1952 and 1953, 24 dams were built. And to this day, if you look on the road maps, for those that still have a paper road map, you take a look and you'll see Sandstone Creek Watershed, the world's first completed flood prevention project. And it's still there today. That was another first. Another first was in Lake Humphreys down by Duncan. They amended the 566 Act to allow water supply. So you could build not only flood control, but you could add water supply for the city of Duncan. That was the first one in the nation. That was 1957. There's a Life magazine, or Post magazine, I guess. They had a centerfold spread in there by Caterpillar where they highlighted that project. So talking about Caterpillar dozers and everything, but that was highlighted in there. That was kind of a neat first. So there's just a lot of firsts around. We had the first rehabilitation project to rehabilitate a dam after 50 years. And there's just a number of firsts. That history, a lot of it was centered right here in Oklahoma that started nationwide. So.
Which was the first rehab? Which one?
Yes, that kind of led in. I was a state engineer here for 15 years, from 1985 till about 99, 2000. And in the 90s, well, there's one other effort in between there. The agency reorganized in 1995 into regions and all, and they were trying to combine technical staffs and all and set up a regional technical staff. Well, our region was Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Just 4 states. And all the technical staffs, we got together and said, we don't want to form a regional technology staff because we know it'll just rob from all of our individual ones. So we put a plan together to all share resources for different topics. And Judy Johnson was the regional conservationist. And she asked if I'd be the leader. We made this proposal and said we can govern ourselves and we'll make sure it's all covered without establishing a new staff. So we had a regional technology board, RTB, and we had representatives from all 4 states. And I was a leader of that for about 2 years as we were getting off the ground and getting that started. So that was a temporary promotion involved, and again, networking with a lot of different people at that stage, at that point in time, just one more step to piece this all together. Well, then in the mid-90s, there got to be a lot of concern about these dams that were coming to the end of their 50-year life. What's going to happen? There was no authority for USDA to assist the local communities to rebuild these dams. The Watershed program is a little bit different than a lot of federal programs. These are not federal dams. They're federally assisted dams that the local sponsors, and in Oklahoma is primarily conservation districts, but they could be municipalities or special use districts in other states, whatever. But they were the ones who were the local sponsors, and they were responsible for getting the easements. Most of these are on private lands. So they'd have to organize a project. They'd have to talk with the landowners to donate. Most of these were all donated easements to build a dam on their property. There was a lot of apprehension there because sometimes the reservoirs would take up some good cropland that was there before. But almost all of them were donated, and at that time there was more of a feeling, I think, of helping the community, that it would help the flood control for the community. And so some of those early conservation district directors, they were the real leaders that really did the legwork to make this happen. And then once they were authorized and got the easements, and we'd go through the survey, design, and construction, and so forth there. So that the conservation districts were a real big part of this. But part of the agreement was that the federal government would pay 100% of the cost of construction. But before the construction would start, the local sponsors would have to sign an operation and maintenance agreement that they agreed to operate and maintain that dam. So they were responsible for maintenance on all of these. Well, back in the 40s, 50s, 50 years seemed like a long time. But it went a whole lot quicker and faster than anybody ever thought. So in the mid-90s, since we were one of the leaders on getting these dams built, we're also the ones that's facing what happens on these aging dams. And on top of that, most of these dams were built to control flooding on agricultural areas downstream, wheat, soybeans, alfalfa, so forth. But then after the dams were built, people started finding out there's some good building sites down here. You'd never dream of building a house in there because it flooded all the time before, but now they found out, hey, it doesn't flood here anymore. So now it's not protecting just agricultural areas, it's protecting people's lives. And along in the mid-70s, when there was some dam failures that killed a lot of people, then they came up with the National Dam Safety Act, and which required standards for different kind of dams. Well, the standards were much higher if the dam protected human life than if it was agricultural areas. So now we have all these dams, and we're getting more and more dams every year, where now they're protecting people's lives downstream, and they don't come close to meeting the safety standards that's needed. But the agency didn't have the authority to work on that. So Congressman Wes Watkins was a very strong supporter of the Watershed program in the 90s. And he went to our church here in Stillwater. And after church, we would always have some project we were talking about. And he was talking about, a lot of it had to do with, what are we going to do with these dams when they come down to their line? So in 1998, he said, Caldwell, you need to come to a hearing in D.C. to talk about this issue with his colleagues there on the Ag Committee. And I was scared to death. I'd never been to D.C. And so I went and gave a slide presentation on the Watershed program and the issues with it. And he introduced a bill, 4409, I think it was, on Rehabilitation Act that would provide USDA with the authority to assist communities with rehabilitation of these aging dams. He knew it wouldn't pass because it was in the waning days of the 105th Congress, and everything starts over again next time. So that's about the time he went to run for governor. And Congressman Frank Lucas had just been in Congress a short while at that time. And he talked with Congressman Lucas and said, you need to have a bill that you can author to carry on through that stage of his career. So Frank Lucas he took over the rehab bill in the beginning of the 106th Congress. So the chief at that time of SCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service at that time, was Pearlie Reed. And we had a helicopter tour when we had the celebration. We had a celebration at Cordell to commemorate the 50th year, the first dam to come to the end of its life. The governor was there, Frank Keating was there, the chief came, Congressman Lucas was there. We didn't have 10,000 people, but we did have almost 1,000, which was a big deal for that time. And Congressman Lucas held a field hearing for the Ag Committee to start talking about what the issues were. They had different people offering testimony and all, and that was the real beginning of a formal effort for trying to get this effort. So after that, or during that, the night before, Pearlie Reed, he said we need to meet. So we went and opened up the field office late that night. And he said, I want to make an announcement tomorrow morning to demonstrate that we have the know-how to rehabilitate these dams. So he wanted to have a pilot rehab project. So Ron Clark was the state conservationist, and he said, how much money do you need? He looked over at me, and we didn't know any. We ended up getting $750,000. So he made the announcement that we're going to do a demonstration rehab project. But we were under the gun because so we went through a very fast planning effort. We selected a dam outside of Cheyenne, Sergeant Major 1. And on April 14th of 2000, we had the dedication ceremony up there to commemorate the first watershed dam to be rehabilitated based upon that. Well, during that period, Pearlie Reed had come to me and said, we need somebody to work with Congress to talk about the need for this rehabilitation. And I had started collecting a lot of data on number of dams and how old they were by state and all that. And I doubt if this would happen today in today's political climate, but at that time, Pearlie Reed made it happen sometime. So I went up there on a special assignment in 1999 and started working on the Hill with congressmen and tell them how many dams were in their congressional district and how old they were and go through the whole spiel. But it was hard to get to the congressman. So the Portland Cement Association, PCA, they had a legislative person that worked on Portland Cement Association, and they saw this and they saw all the data that was involved, and their main person on the Hill was Dave Hubbard, and he just thought this was fantastic with all this data, and they had all the contacts with cement plants back in the field. So they would call the cement plants and say, we need to see Congressman so-and-so for something, and they would get a meeting set up. We were trying to get in with some of these, and we just couldn't get it. And they said, how's 2:30 tomorrow? So we would go in and talk to the congressmen and their staffs and all. We ended up getting 62 co-sponsors of the bill. we went through a number of hearings where we'd have the hearings primarily on the House side, a couple on the Senate side. Congressman Lucas was the primary author here on the Senate side, Senator Coverdale from Georgia, but then he died unexpectedly all of a sudden, and Blanche Lincoln from Lincoln picked it up on the Senate side. So we went through all the hearings, and which was quite a process. This little farm boy from Iowa going to D.C., and I knew Doug McCaleb was the legislative affairs director, and he was so good on just mapping things out, the next steps and all. And I told him there's some of these people that would talk, they were so elegant in terms of how they could, and how I just seemed like a little farm kid. And he said, don't you change a thing what you say, or do you just keep on doing it? You have more, it seemed like you have more reliability in what you're saying than some of these other people. They don't need a smooth talker here. They just need to know the facts. And the chief would always be the one that would do the commenting, and they'd ask the questions, and I would sit at, remember the last hearing we had, it was all 45 members on the Ag Committee, and you have a little witness table down in front. And it seemed like before every hearing, the congressman would have one thing. He said, I'll vote for it if we do this. And it would always be right before it. So I was out in the hall and we were dealing with that. And I told Doug, I said, now the places are all filled. I wanted to be in this one. And he says, he laughed and he said, yeah, we got a spot for you. He was sitting right beside the chief in there, and we were asking. So the chief would ask questions, and he'd lean over, and we'd talk about it a little bit. And then pretty soon, a couple of the congressmen said, "Why don't we just cut to the chase? Could I just talk to that young man?" That happened a couple times through there. But in the end, it came down to the end of the 106th Congress, and if it wouldn't pass by the end of that Congress, then everything starts all over again. And it was getting hard time to get any floor votes because it was all getting bundled up toward the end. Everybody was fighting for floor votes. So Congressman Lucas ended up adding that to the Grain Standards Act, Public Law 472. So it passed the House, it went to the Senate, and there was a lot of issues along the way. That special assignment started in 1999, went into 2000. So I was there for 2 years. But I'd come home, I'd go up there for a week or two, and then come home for a week or two, and then work with different states. It was a great experience. So it came time for getting this all done, and it kind of got down to the wire. Was this going to happen or not? And finally, on November 9th of 2000, President Clinton signed the amendments to the PO 566. So that gave the authority to USDA to assist communities with rehabilitation of their dams. So during this time, we had some pilot projects. We had them in New Mexico, Ohio, Mississippi, and Wisconsin. And we had some pilot rehab projects that were especially funded to make sure this happened. So during that time, we worked with these states, and it was a unique opportunity. We started out with a blank sheet of paper. We developed the policy, the procedures, and the whole bit. That's really unique. You don't get a chance to work on a brand new program that nothing's been done before. So we worked through that whole process. And then after the Sergeant Major celebration we had out here, Burley Reed pulled me off the side and he said, looks like this is going to pass. And he said, we're going to need a new director for this new program. Would you be interested? And I said, well, that depends where it's housed. And he said, well, it'd be in D.C. And I said, I just can't do it. I've been up there and I just can't live in that place. I'd go up for a week or two, but you'd always come home. And Carolyn, bless her heart, she was one who kept everything going back home while I was traveling so much then. And he said, well, how about if we headquartered in Stillwater, Oklahoma? And I said, I'm your man. So that was really unique. So came the first program leader for this new Watershed Rehabilitation Program. And it was a great experience. For starting out a brand new program, I would fly up to DC 1 week a month. And then 2 other weeks of that month, I'd be in different states and get out and work with the sponsors on specific dams and help them through the process that we'd go through the planning and design. It was just, I think during that time I was up there, I was in 35 different states. By that time, our girls were in college and Carolyn wasn't working, so she went with me to DC on an awful lot of the trips. We'd go up on a Saturday morning and come home Sunday nights. We'd have the weekends and we saw more things in DC than I think people that lived there for 20 years did, because they wouldn't want to drive back into town after working there. And then we got to be around in all the states, and you get back to really see the real state and all the interstates and all. So we just had a great time during that period of time. And then, and things were going great. We started rehabbing a lot of dams, and we got a new chief, Bruce Knight. And he came to me and he said, Caldwell, you need to come to DC. He said, we need to use all your contacts and experience on other programs. And I said, I just can't do it. And he said, I said, I can still be there when you need him. And he said, no, sometimes we get a call and you got to be there the next morning. And I said, Chief, there's been times when I got calls on Saturday or Sunday and said I needed to be there Monday for something, and I was always there. This will work. Well, push come to shove, and he says, you need to come. And I said, I'm not coming. And consequently, I lost that job. And that was so hard. That was like abandoning a baby that you'd raised. That was so hard of the program and all. But Daryl Dominic was the state conservationist in Oklahoma, and he was so good to me. He took me back to on the state staff here, before I retired for a couple of years. Still worked on Watershed issues and stayed in touch on the national side and did some national things. But Daryl Dominic was the son of Max Dominic, who was on my staff, and Max's dad was a soil conservation technician. So there's 3 generations there, all within SCS and NRCS. But Daryl really took care of me there to come back. But that was a hard route. So the last couple of years I was here in Oklahoma before I retired in 2009.
What was your title, since you would not have been state engineer at that time?
I was civil engineer. Yeah. During that whole time, in some of the projects when I was a state engineer, we built Boomer Dam. And that was a new experience because we built dams all over, but building a dam in your own community and we were on TV a lot. They'd always film the city council meetings, and there was a little bit of controversy with the road and all of that. And we had to drain the lake for about 5 years while we were building it, because we couldn't build it all at once because we didn't have the funding at any one time. We'd only get about $1 million a year, so we had to do it in phases. And I remember when I was in a grocery store down here, and this lady came up and says, I know you're that dam man. And that started going around being the dam man. Well, then when we started with the rehab deal, then it became the old dam man. And that ended up being on the business cards and and everything else that when you go into the states and all. And during that time to get that legislation, it was really a cooperative effort with there were so many people involved, and NRCS could only do so much, and really the leadership in this came primarily through the National Watershed Coalition. John Peterson was the director of that. He did a wonderful job working with all the states, and they would work with their elected officials. Association of State Dam Safety Officials were instrumental in this. Portland Cement Association with Dave Hubbard and all. And when this was passed, this was the very first legislation that provided federal assistance to work on non-federal dams. That had never been done before. So this was quite a milestone to make that all happen. But it was just one of those things that it was such a great opportunity and so unique that just, again, another one of those unique things that happened that just was big milestones in your career when you look back.
I'd say those weren't 40-hour-a-week weeks.
No, there was too much stuff going on there, that getting prepared for the next day and getting prepared for the next week and all the traveling.
So were you holding down the job here too, plus your duties there, or did you?
Well, the first year I was, on the Regional Technology Board, that was a collateral deal. So I was state engineer while that technology board leader. That was a very busy time.
Yes.
In the first year, we didn't know what it was going to develop into, so I was continued to be state engineer while I was in DC. But then as that became more prevalent and took a lot more time, then they had an acting here, and then eventually they hired a new state engineer while I was in the DC job.
In the ring of career, would that be the state engineer would be the highest level you could go, or could you actually become?
In the state, that was the highest level. You could go to the national office in the engineering staff, which is a small staff there. Then they have a design unit in Fort Worth, and a planning unit in Little Rock, Arkansas. So you almost had to make that decision. Are you going to stay in the technical ranks, or are you getting into more of the administrative? And there's some engineers that went totally the administrative that became state conservationists.
Well, that was possible then.
That was, in fact, at one time, that was a good way to become a state conservationist. That I think at one time the majority of the state conservationists were engineers, and now there's might be one or two.
And you elected to stay in the technical side of things.
But it was a nice mix because
Yes,
with
sounds
what we were
like it.
doing, I think we got the best of both worlds
Yes.
on this one. I worked a lot with the state conservationists when we were working with the states, and worked on the congressional side. And Doug McCaleb was a legislative director, and he was a young man there, but he was so good. He would help guide this along. And Bruce Julian was another one on the Watershed staff, and he was one of the best visionaries in terms of looking ahead what needed to be done. And he really needed somebody to follow up with the details on that vision. But the three of us really made a good team on the NRCS side, and then working with National Watershed Coalition and ASDSO. It was just a good cooperative effort. That was one of the best partnerships you could ever get.
What you know up here needs to be written down.
That's what I've been working on. I during the process of getting ready for all the hearings and all that time, we were starting to gather data. We had all kinds of data from Oklahoma, but some states didn't have much at all. And turnover of people, and they didn't build that many dams and didn't have that much institutional knowledge. So started collecting all the files we could get, and they were scattered between the engineering staffs and the program staffs, and some what the states had and national office didn't, and so forth. So started collecting all of that. And then we had the opportunity to get into Dam Watch. And that was kind of a fluke, as it was gathering all this data just for Oklahoma. We spent a couple of years of scanning all of the construction drawings and all of the operation and maintenance agreements and all of the emergency action plans, the inspection reports. We ended up with 30,000 electronic files of data for all these watershed projects just in Oklahoma. And it took about 3 years to go through that. And Lil Holcomb was secretary. She was the world's best at keeping track of all this kind of stuff. So we got all done. We said, at that time, they had what they called a DVD, and you could put so much more information on that than you could a CD. And we could put all of this data on 2 DVDs. So we made copies for all the state staff and the Conservation Commission and everything. And we said, we've done our job. Now everybody has all of this data electronically. And I remember about 2 weeks after we distributed those, somebody came in and they said, by the way, I found that other set of as-built drawings we couldn't find. And then somebody come in and said we had a no-and-M agreement. And say, well, crap, now those DVDs are all out of date. They aren't complete. And how do you ever keep them up to date? So we went to an ASDSO conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2009. And there was U.S. Engineering had a display there, an exhibit on Bridge Watch. And it was an interactive internet deal that would have all of the data, and you could access it on the internet from home or whatever. And where we were talking, a dam is nothing but a bridge with the hole plugged up. You still have the construction drawings and the maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So we talked with them about that, and they said, well, they had a small pilot project in Connecticut, and they had about 70 dams they were converting it. Well, as luck would have it, Noah Herbert, who's the national engineer director, and Mark Locke, who is a national design engineer, were both at that conference. So we got all together, said, this is what we need. So we could put all of this electronic data up on there for everybody to access, and we could update it as needed. And on top of that, it was tied to the Weather Service. So we had every drainage area digitized. And it was tied in with the Weather Service. So the weather, it would accumulate how much rainfall occurred on that drainage area for that one dam. And then we computed what the capacity was for every dam on how much rainfall that dam could take before it would start going through the auxiliary spillway. And when that happened, it would send an email or a text alert to the people responsible for that dam. And that turned out just to be a godsend. That how much better can you get than that? So they agreed to fund a pilot project here in Oklahoma for Dam Watch. And we used all that data that we'd collected. And it was going to be a trial run to see if we should expand this nationally. Well, after 2 years, it exceeded all of our expectations. And we said, there's no reason to wait through the end of this pilot. This is what we need. And surprisingly, they went ahead and issued a national contract that covered all 12,000 dams in 47 states. So then we used that data that we'd had through the rehab days to start populating all of this internet, this dam watch system. We digitized the drainage areas for all 12,000 dams, figured the capacity, got all this data, and now that's in its second 5-year contract. So now it's fully implemented nationwide. We've got about 1,500 users of NRCS staff, the project sponsors, and also everybody, they can sign up to get alerts from the Weather Service. So we know what dam. Before, you had to wait for a couple of days. You knew that it rained really heavy down in the southern part of the county, but you didn't know exactly where or which watershed projects. They couldn't get to them because the roads were flooded. So you'd have to wait a few days to see what really happened. Now we got an advance warning. Now we could call them, or they could find out and say that dam number 17 had 9 inches of rain last night. So now you could focus in on the limited resources you had to prioritize which ones to take a look at first. You could look at those that were high hazard, that had people living downstream from them first. It just changed the way we deal. Now as we got less people, now we can use this as a monitoring system.
And where's that housed? Is it?
It's housed at Fort Collins, or through the Kansas City system, and that's part of the problem. U.S. Engineering is in Connecticut, and this was their first experience of trying to maintain a system that was not on their property. And that's caused a few issues, but we're dealing with those. So in the process of doing that, we had all of this data, and now we've got it all housed in one spot, and for Dam Watch anyway. And when I was coming closer to retirement, I figured out that I had all of that data on my computer, and besides the history of the Watershed program and a lot of other details, and I felt guilty about walking out the door with all that in place. So about 4 years ago, I started putting together a document called, not very creative, but it's Watershed Facts and Figures. And it was the history of each of the programs that we talked about. It was statistics by state whenever we had, whether it was number of dams or high hazard dams or benefits or whatever, it'd be by state. So it's a document that's 230 pages long, and it's got 89 figures of charts and graphs and tables and maps, so that it should be a resource for newer employees and sponsors and all that want to use that.
Good.
So just finalized that about 2 weeks ago. And a lot of that was done as an Earth Team volunteer. I just wanted to make sure that was all captured. So if nobody else uses it, that's immaterial, but I just felt better walking out knowing that was all captured.
Well, that's good. That people will like that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. And I think we're going to get that up on the internet where people could link to it and cite that as a resource.
So the Dam Watch was you were instrumental in getting it.
Along with a lot of other people. There's
Yeah.
nothing that can be done by one person.
Right.
But there were just a lot of people that had the same vision.
And most of these dams are earthen dams? They're not
almost all
necessarily
earthen dams. Almost all earthen dams. They're the concept of these is that you have a reservoir there, but that's just to collect the sediment over the 50-year life. And then as the water builds up behind the reservoir, it has a small principal spillway pipe to discharge it. But when you get a big rain, water comes down, it's temporarily stored behind that dam, and then it's slowly released through the principal spillway pipe over a period of a week or two. So if you have a whole bunch of dams in this watershed, before when it would rain, all that water would flush on downstream all at the same time and cause the flooding. But now it's all temporarily stored behind these dams, and it's all slowly released, and that provides the flood control.
Were there any that you went back in and said, oh, this wasn't a good idea to put that there, let's take it out?
We've only had 3. The Rehabilitation Act allows for decommissioning to take it out, but it's rarely used. The 3 that we've decommissioned were not because it was in a bad location or whatever, but the geology was such that we just couldn't build a dam that was reliable and safe. That there was a lot of either gypsum caverns or leakage going through it that we just couldn't control, so we took the dams out. But those are the only 3 nationwide that have been taken out like that.
Were there any that were with the wetlands? returning them back to wetlands? Were any of them taken out
No,
for that?
no. As we've got into it with when NEPA came into effect in the 80s, we had to consider a lot more of that than we did before in planning. In some cases, if there was any wetlands or woodlands or whatever, we'd have to mitigate that before we could construct the dam. So that took a little extra effort and cost to mitigate that area.
NEPA, National, you said
National Environmental Protection Act. It was in the 80s.
A lot to consider. Oklahoma being right up there with leading the charge.
Oklahoma was a leader throughout, and to this day, there's very few people that know the dam exists, let alone how it protects their communities.
Are there other ones? Well, you said, let's go back to Boomer. You said you had to drain it. It was drained.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take to fill back up?
There's my wife can tell this story better, but I was interviewed with the news press here. How long will it take to fill up? And I went into this explanation about, on an average annual basis for runoff that comes out, and there's 2 dams above that, so they have to fill and maintain before this. So I said, it'd probably take at least a year, maybe longer, depending on weather. That was on a Thursday. On Saturday, we got a large rain, and it filled up that weekend. So my credibility was, if I had any of a shot at that point in time.
Proof too that it's needed, I guess.
Oh yeah,
too.
oh yeah, it's proven several times.
So are there other ones around campus that protect the campus here?
Well, believe it or not, there's 11 of them inside the city limits, or just outside city limits. University Estates, that dam is one of those. Wittenberg Lake up there north, that's one. There's one on the golf course just to the east of there. The one you probably travel over every week, just west of campus here, on where Hall of Fame meets Western. You go up and over that hump. Yeah. That hump is one of these dams. Karsten Creek out there, that's Site 46. That's one of the flood control dams. Lake McMurtry, the recreation area around there. That was really built for supplemental water supply for the city of Stillwater. And that, when Caldwell Reservoir and the pipeline came in, that wasn't used. So the city of Perry is now using Lake Carl Blackwell water as a portion of their supplemental water. So all right here, and we got 2 of them down here just south of 19th Street. Back in there, that some of those areas down in there, that Cedar Oaks apartment used to flood quite often. If you notice, it doesn't flood anymore. That's because we've got 2 flood control dams upstream, that tributary.
Okay.
I noticed that when large rains, the channel where it crosses 19th Street doesn't even get half full anymore. So and that's a good example here that you've lived here a long time, and you just don't hear or appreciate what they do for the community.
No, I mean, Sanger used to flood a lot between 51 and 19th, I guess, and they built
every 10. That was a little different deal, but
that's what I was thinking.
When you take and we've got a lot of pictures of Stillwater back in the 50s. 57 was a big year. There was a lot of flooding. You see all the flooding that occurred in Stillwater, and most people don't even know it did flood then and don't realize why it doesn't flood today.
And go on through the neighborhood right behind us here helps too.
Oh, definitely.
The dam you were talking about.
Yeah, I doubt if those houses would be there yet if it wasn't for that small dam.
So during your time as state engineer, was there a project that just sticks out in your mind as the top?
I think Boomer is one of those, and I think part of that, 2 reasons. One, it's in the local community and you deal with it every day. The other one, that was very unique in that the concrete spillway on that is really unique. And that spillway is one of a kind. There is not another one like that in the world, because it was developed out here at the ARS station out by Lake Carl Blackwell, where they started model studying that. And that particular structure is 2 football fields long and 100 foot wide. So you could basically set 2 football fields end to end in there. And it drops the water 35 feet from the inlet to the outlet. And that size of a structure, as you can imagine, there's a lot of energy involved in that. So it was model studied out there to come up with a hydraulically efficient structure that would function.
There's some concrete around it, isn't there?
It's all concrete.
That's what.
Yeah, there's about 5,000 yards of concrete in that one.
Tell us,
in the structure itself.
do you want to talk a little bit about that lab, that particular lab, because that is unique for the, from what I
Absolutely,
understand, it's unique.
absolutely. That's the only one like it in the nation. And one of their primary customers is USDA, and primarily for the Watershed program. And it has a history back in the early 40s when it was developed. And at that time, they were studying vegetated channels, waterways, and vegetated channels. And they came up with all the design criteria and design aids for how you build a grass waterway, depended on how wide the waterway was, how deep it was, what the slope was. They figured that out with all different types of grasses out there and on the retardance value on each one of them. You go out there today and you can still see some of those original research links in there where where those channels are still in place. And then it moved from there to some of the structural side on the inlets used on all of these dams. If you fly over, especially those dams built after 1960, you'll see the dams in South Carolina, the inlets look exactly like they do in Oklahoma, like they do in North Dakota. And that's because that research that they did on the inlets structures was all done out here at the Stillwater lab, and that became the standard design for most all of these dams across the nation. They moved from that into rock riprap chutes in terms of how big a rock you needed at different slopes to be stable and to drop the water. Then as we got into the rehab days, they started looking at what happens if a dam overtops and how long will a dam withstand overtopping before it washes out. So they built small dams, and then they'd go through the research to see how long it would take to fail them, both from overtop as well as internal erosion. They'd have some tests where they'd build this embankment, but they'd put in a 1.5-inch pipe through the whole thing, and then they'd fill up this reservoir behind it, and then they'd have a tractor and they'd pull the pipe out and see how long that 1.5-inch diameter hole through there would develop into a major cavity to the point that it would cave in and fail the dam. And they used different sandy materials, clay materials, and so that research was done. And we had a perfect audience for all of this. They would work months getting a system all designed and built, and then they'd call us up and say, we're going to run the water at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we would come out there and we'd see all the fun stuff for while the test was going on, and then we'd go back home, and then for the next few months they'd try to take all the data and try to make sense out of it, and then they do the next run. So we got a front row seat on a lot of this cutting edge technology. And what Dr. Sherry Hunt, who's the director out there now, she is concentrated on the roller compacted concrete, the RCC steps, where they're concrete, but it's not the structural concrete. And they put it in with rollers it's much wider and all, but it only has reinforcing steel in it. And that's being used on a lot of the rehab projects nationwide. Because a lot of these rehab projects, the dams were in a community, and it might have been out in the middle of nowhere when it was built. But now there's houses built all the way around the reservoir and downstream, and you just can't build the dam higher and wider because you'd be covering up houses. So in order to pass that water safely through that dam, they use these roller compacted concrete structures that will go over top of the dam and drop the water on these steps. And she is going through all the research on height of the steps and the velocity and the steepness and all those variables. If you haven't been out there, it's an interesting lab to go see.
I'm not. So would her background be engineering too?
Yes.
With them?
In fact, her first job was with NRCS. She was in the design staff here, and she designed a couple of dams here. Then she had an opportunity to go out there, and then she got her master's and PhD, and now she's the director of the lab.
Well, when you were state engineer, would you consult with them, or
all the time?
And then would they ask for suggestions or input from you, or?
Oh, once in a while, but generally it was a case where we had a problem and we wanted to do something, and does that make sense? Hydraulically, would that do it? They just had a sense after seeing all of these test runs, they would just have a gut feeling that's good or no way should you ever try that.
Do you know why it was in Oklahoma? I mean, why here?
I had heard it came from, the original one was in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I forget, yes, there was a time in the 40s and 50s where there was USDA demonstration projects. And a lot of this land was on fee title to USDA, starting from Western and 51, from there on west. That was USDA property, including that area out there at Lake Carl Blackwell.
Okay.
And then after a while, then it was deeded over to the university. And so they had that property. It was right downstream from Lake Carl Blackwell. That's a unique one nationwide there too, because most places they have to pump the water for the test and so forth. They have 5 20-inch siphons that go over Lake Carl Blackwell Dam, so they can get all that water coming through all their research projects. So they have no pumping cost whatsoever. It's just gravity. So they can have a lot higher capacity test runs than most any place else in the nation. And they're known internationally. I mean, they interact with scientists worldwide because of the research work that have been done out here.
Another good Oklahoma.
Absolutely. They had their 75th anniversary here just a few years ago.
So no regrets for moving from Missouri to here.
Not at all.
To
No.
here.
That was a good move on so many different respects, family wise, career wise, just experience wise, getting out and seeing the country.
And the only maybe small regret is not taking the job in DC for the.
Yeah, no, that was.
That's still not.
If you remember back at that time, prices were going sky high, and the bubble hadn't burst yet, but it was just atrocious what houses cost. We actually Carolyn and I went there on a house hunting trip, saying, well, maybe we could do it. So we looked around and we couldn't find anything we could afford that was within an hour commute. And even those, at one house, we just about looked at it and they said, we told ourselves, well, we lived in the house like this when we first started in Mason City, so I guess we could do it again. But then you look at the cost and it was terrible. Had we went there, we would have been financially ruined. I mean, the bubble came and we would have been underwater. I mean, that would have been a terrible move. So, and back here, we got the best of both worlds with those contacts, and still tied in with the national office, and we still do a lot of work with the national office, and still work nationally on Dam Watch implementation, and we're always improving that. And one of the things we're working on now, and we didn't talk about the benefits of this, but on all those dams, before they could be authorized, you had to have a cost-benefit ratio of greater than 1. So the thinking behind this was that you're using taxpayers' money to construct these dams, and you had to get public benefits out of those over a period of 50 years generally to get those benefits back. So they'd go through this detailed analysis on saying if there's no dam in place and you get a certain size rain, what area would be flooded downstream, and how much damage would that cause to the wheat field, to the roads, to the fences and everything. And they do that for different size rains, different frequency of rains, up to a 500-year frequency rain. They do that with no dams in place. And then you go into those same areas and you put dams in from a planning standpoint. And you say, okay, now when you get those same rainfalls, how much area downstream would be flooded, how deep, how much damage to the wheat, roads, and fences. And then the difference between those two are the benefits that those dams provide. So if the average annual cost of construction is less than the average annual benefits you get over that 50-year period, then you had a BC ratio greater than 1, and it could be authorized. So we had all of that data, all that benefit data. And since we've started the rehab program, we've got that all on a common base. So every year we take that nationwide data and we update it to current dollars for inflation for the previous year, so we can maintain, because they were all built at different years. So we went through an exercise to get everything on the same playing field for the year 2000, I think. And then every year since then, we just upped that national database by the factor of inflation. And as of today, the benefits are, on an annual basis, are $2.3 billion a year from the watershed projects nationwide. And in Oklahoma, it's $96 million a year. So in Oklahoma, basically that says that on an average basis, if those dams had not been in place, there'd be $96 million of damages on an average basis each and every year. So these are really damages that didn't occur because these dams were in place. And that's very conservative.
That's what I was thinking. Yes.
Because that's all based on original planning data, whereas all wheat fields downstream, in some cases, there's subdivisions downstream. And that part has not been updated. So we know that that's very, very, very conservative. But nationwide, 2.3 billion, in Oklahoma, 96 million. That's for all the watershed projects. When you look at just the projects that have dams in them, it's about half that. It's about 1.1 billion a year nationwide. The other 1.1 billion is from other types of projects, because there's projects for recreation, water supply, those types of things. That's on and above that. So we've got a huge public benefit out there that a lot of people just don't realize.
And you had your finger in that.
Just had a piece of that. So
that's a good feeling, though.
It is.
This
feels good that these dams are going to continue to function as designed and protect communities for the next generation or two. That's, even if they don't realize it, that's a good feeling.
That's if they get rehabbed or
that's if they're maintained. And I put a little paper together on the perfect storm that's brewing. And all of these things are happening at the same time. We got 12,000 dams. There's a lot of dams out there. There's a lot of these dams were built to protect agricultural areas. Now they protect people's lives. So they're high hazard. They don't meet safety standards. We have these dams will kill people. To this date, USDA has a record going that there's been no dam that has failed that has resulted in loss of life. Yet. We can't be that lucky forever. We got 12,000 dams, over half of them are beyond their design life. So there's a potential for loss of life. Some people say, well, these small dams, they won't kill anybody. I worked with a fellow with Bureau of Reclamation, Wayne Graham. His entire career was going out and investigating dam failures that resulted in loss of life. And he spent his whole career trying to come up with procedure. Why did this dam fail and didn't kill anybody? And this dam failed and killed a lot of people. And you would think the common thought is that the big dams kill the people. You look at Teton Dam, 1976, it failed. That was the largest dam in the United States, over 300 feet tall, earth embankment. Killed 11 people. And when you look at that, some of them drowned. They evacuated everybody. Some of these people went back to get something and drowned. There's one died by a gunshot because he was evacuating. He put his shotgun in the trunk of the car and it went off. But 11 people. About less than a year later, Toccoa Falls in Georgia, they had a small dam that was about 25 feet tall, and it failed one night. I went down through a dormitory area in a small school. 39 people lost their lives. And within a year, other dams failed, and there'd be children that had failed. And at some of these meetings, you talk to some of the survivors. I mean, it just rips your heart out. So these small dams, and they found out that it's the small dams that kill the most people. It's not the big dams. And because nobody thinks that they'll be there, there's no warning, or it happened at night or whatever. Happen to be driving down the road at the most inopportune time, and you get flushed off the road when the flood wave goes through. So the dams kill people. You add on to that, another piece of the perfect storm is the loss of institutional knowledge. The people who are working today haven't had the opportunity to work with design and construction of many dams. So we've got that working against us. You look at the funding. Everybody's funding is short, and it's at a time when these dams need to be maintained. That takes money. It comes from the state legislature. They've got a lot of other needs, and a lot of it is an education problem. So just continually fighting to get the money needed for maintenance on these. Besides the rehabilitation, the Rehabilitation Act provided 65% funding from federal government, 35% local. So the locals need to come up with their 35%. These rehab projects, what these dams might have cost $20,000 to $30,000 to build back in the 50s. The rehab costs now are going into the millions. Be anywhere from as little as $2 million up to $10 million. So 35% is a chunk of money for that. So in the federal government, the appropriations have not been as high on the rehab piece. It's what's needed. So any one of those issues at one time would be a challenge. You put all 7 of those all together, and we've got a real challenge ahead of us. And I guess as far as looking ahead, today's generation is the one that's going to tell the success as far as how long these dams will continue to function as designed to protect those communities. And it comes down to being able to tell the story. They need to constantly tell the story to community leaders, to elected officials, to the people that it's protecting, just so people understand and appreciate what they do and what it takes to keep them safe. Without telling that story and making it personal, it's going to be a real challenge in the future for that many dams that are getting that old. So I think that's a challenge this next generation has, is first appreciating previous generations, what it took to get this infrastructure in place, and then to pick up the torch and lead the way to tell the story, to continue to get the funding to maintain and rehabilitate these dams to keep them safe for future generations.
Sounds like each county might need to do a map and have a tour.
Some are doing that. There's nothing like taking your elected official out and get organized on. For 2 different stints, we had a series of maps made for every legislative district in the state that had their district boundaries and showed the location of the dams, how many are high hazard, how many of them are more than 50 years old, what the maintenance needs were. And then the local people would go into their elected officials and give them that fact sheet and say, we need your support. That's what it takes, because everybody else does it. So if you don't do it, you're going to be forgotten.
Well, in Oklahoma, is there one that comes to mind that really needs a priority? A dam that's
I can't say there's any that's
top priority.
in imminent danger of collapse. And just because they come to the end of their 50 years doesn't mean that they're going to collapse that next day. But it just means that it's going to need more attention. And we've got some dams with a few hundred people living downstream from them that don't meet current safety standards. We've got some that has some seepage problems, some issues there. We've got some issues of landowners. These oil companies want water really bad. So believe it or not, they'll come in and they'll fill up that principal spillway pipe with concrete so that it makes a bigger lake. But then at that point, you're really sunk because all the detention storage is taken up, so it just runs around it. I mean, there's always something coming up. Somebody building in the flood pool. They want to have a house where they can look out at that lake, and they want to get as close as possible. And it hasn't filled up for the last 10 years, so there's not a problem. Until it rains, that big rain, and then they get inundated in their new house, and then they come in all upset.
You tell them the Boomer Lake refill story then.
Yes. That's just part of the challenge that I think this next generation is going to have to.
Well, when you retire, or is there a state engineer now for NRCS?
Here?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's still someone working on some of these issues.
But in all fairness to him, he doesn't have near the staff I was blessed with when it came. I mean, it's not a fourth the size. And they don't have the experience level that was there. They don't have the 30-year experienced people that are there. The funding is going down staffing-wise, so they can't fill positions as much. So if you don't have that experience of repetitions of doing a number of dams, a number of situations, you don't have that skill set that's there. They're relying an awful lot on private consulting engineers now because they don't have the staff here. So then you rely on the private consulting engineers, and then you got to have people back in NRCS side to review those to make sure you're getting a quality product. So
they may pull you back in.
Not me. I'll be watching though. I'll be watching very closely. But we've had our fun.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the association work you've done, the historic?
Yes. Yes.
At AB, that it was.
Yeah, the Oklahoma Conservation History Society.
No, that's not what I'm talking about just yet. The American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers. Historic Landmark Committee.
Yes, in 2011, and this was kind of unique. The American Association of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineers have been in existence for 100 years. And they have a engineering historic landmark series where they highlight like the first tractor or the first plow or the first conservation tractor, those types of things. Well, we tried something different and made a proposal to highlight the small watershed program as an engineering landmark. And it took about 3 years to go through the process, but we got that designated. And that was done in 2011. We had the administrator from ARS out here and the chief of NRCS out here. If you go down to the state capitol grounds outside the ag building, there'll be a large, you'll see a big granite monument that commemorates that. We've got one up in front of our office. There's one over at ARS where it has a plaque talking about the 12,000 dams in Oklahoma's place in that. So that's a national engineering landmark now.
Okay. There was some, but you were doing other things for that particular association too, though. But I don't have on my notes what that was, so we can skip it.
Well, ag engineering is one of those. Every profession has their technical society,
yeah.
And we've been active in that for 40 years or so. They do a lot of good work.
Do your colleagues in those refer to you as the old M man too?
Yeah, it seems like you can't go anywhere anymore. That's part of it.
All right, well, we can go ahead and talk about the other one, then, the Oklahoma one.
Yeah, and it's kind of related with all we're talking about, with all the history that there's been in Oklahoma. And I concentrate on the Watershed program, but from a conservation program, I mean, there was the leadership there equally as much, and some of the same people. But we could see on that this generation was leaving, and the new generation didn't have that knowledge or appreciation for those older programs. And I'd say Tom Lucas was the godfather of this thought of having a conservation history society. He had always talked about, he was an RC&D coordinator, then became public affairs specialist in the last couple of years of his career. And he always talked about having a conservation museum. And he and I would talk about that. We talked about that for 4 or 5 years. And he even went to the point of approaching the president of Oklahoma State University, because there was a vacant classroom down here, or office down here. Said, well, that would be a good start on a conservation museum, so we could start displaying some of this conservation history. And then that didn't take off. So then, but there was a lot of people that really agreed with that concept that needed to be done. And it was in spring of 2016 that Tom sent an email out to everybody who we'd talked with that might have an interest, and saying, are you interested in helping with the formation of a group to promote the History Society? And we got pretty good response, but it's like one of those things, everybody agrees to it, but when it comes time to actually doing it, it starts going off. Well, in fall of that year, we had our first meeting down in Oklahoma City. It was in 2016, and we just called it a steering committee. There were about 25 people there. And we talked about the concept of having a 501c3. And Charles Rainbolt used to be the head of Farmers Home down here for a while. He's an attorney in Clinton. He had assisted with these, and he volunteered his time to go through the paperwork on getting that established. And there's a whole lot more to form a 501c3 than I ever dreamt. But for IRS purposes, you need bylaws, and also we started forming bylaws. And then in early 2017, we met as a group to kind of tie down an organization as such and talk about bylaws. And I think a critical element was about in October of 2017, where we had our next meeting, but we met early that morning at the Cracker Barrel in Oklahoma City to convince Ben Pollard that he needed to be the president of this new organization. And thankfully, he agreed. And Ben has the personality, has the contacts, he has the background and all. And I think that was a real stepping stone. That was a turning point. So we formed the association, the Oklahoma Conservation History Society, with a mission to collect, preserve, and share the rich Oklahoma conservation history. And we finalized the bylaws, established a board of directors, and there were 9 board of directors, and Ben is the president.
And who were they? Where were they?
I'm putting on the spot with Kim Farber is the secretary treasurer. Wayne Fieseth was vice president. Myself, Don Bartolina, Stan Rice, Frida Rice, Bill Jordan. How many do I got left?
72. And then Ben, I'm assuming.
And Ben.
So there's one more.
Trying to think around the table. It was Mike Rooker, and then he has been replaced by Sam Stalkup now.
Okay.
So those are the board of directors. The 501c3 is still in the process of going through. A couple milestones. We said, well, we need a membership. We need some money to work with. So at the annual meeting of Association of Oklahoma Conservation Districts, OECD, we started selling memberships to this new society. We set up memberships of $25 for individuals, $40 for families, $50 for organizations, and $100 if you wanted to be a founding member. And it shocked me, the interest that was there. We ended up with 83 members in 2018, and the vast majority of them paid the $100 voluntarily. And that continues today. They're still paying their $100, even though now we call it a sustaining membership. So there's a real interest out there and a concern for losing a lot of that history. So that was a big stepping stone. To handle the finances, we use OECD as the financial agent, so they handle all the money. Gary O'Neill with NRCS has been very helpful, and we have an agreement with them where he has helped fund some of the projects. Two of the main milestones here, two or three of them, we worked with Jan Davis with the Oklahoma libraries, Department of Libraries, and we worked with her on one of the first projects was getting all of the soil surveys that were published, getting them all in one location. And we think we have a complete set of those statewide now, including some of those that were dated 2000 or 1915, 1918, some of the real early ones. So that was a neat project. One of the big ones that we're most proud of is just what this is here with the Oklahoma history in terms of working with the OSU oral history research program. And that between those that were donated by OSU and those that have been funded primarily through the NRCS agreement, there are now 21 that are posted on the oral history website. And when we get all done with those that are funded and in process, there will be a total of 37 of these oral histories. And these are a lot of these were the people that lived during that period of that history that was occurring back in the 50s and 60s. And it's valuable to have that first-hand stories and knowledge of what it took to get these programs established and what the result was. And it's too bad we've missed some very influential leaders, but it's better to start today than to miss those leaders of today. So we've got 37 on tape with the transcripts and all that going. So we're really proud of that project and all the work that you all are doing to make that happen. The other one is a cooperative agreement with the Oklahoma History Society. We have SCS at the time did an excellent job of photographs back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and the 70s, where they would have 4x6 photographs of different conservation practices, dams, watershed projects out there. Very well documented on the back of every photo, saying who the photographer was, the date, and it would have a paragraph of description of what you're looking at, the people that are in there, very well documented. So we've have an agreement with the Oklahoma History Society where they take those photos and digitize them. They use the Department of Corrections staff to do the digitizing. Then they come in and they take the metadata that's on the back, the descriptions, and enter that into a big, massive spreadsheet. They send all of this down to North Texas State for students down there to merge all of this together, the image with the metadata, and then load it onto the Oklahoma Gateway to Oklahoma History. It's a public website. So when that gets loaded, then a user will be able to go in and anything will be searchable. So anything that was on the back. So if you wanted to see pictures of terraces that were constructed in Kay County in the 1950s, you put that in the search engine and it'll pop up immediately all the photos that meet that condition. If you want to look at all the dams they have photos of in Barnett's Creek Watershed, it'll pop all of those up. So at this point, we started out with what we estimated 20,000 of those photos. We had them in different places in the state office, and Dwayne Phillips had done a real good job of organizing these. But we collected them, and we estimated 20,000 of those just in the state office. So they started on those. By the time they took out the duplicates, by the time they took out those that weren't very good quality or faded so you couldn't tell what was on the back, they've ended up with 12,000 high quality photos that are well documented. So they're in the process now. They have them all scanned. They have them just about the metadata cleaned up. They're just about ready to send to North Texas State. So hopefully early next calendar year, we'll have those 12,000 photos available for the public to search. We have funding now for an additional 15,000 photos that we're working on. And we'll work with the conservation districts out in the field to gather those photos to start the next batch.
So you think there's more, or you know there's more?
We know there's more.
You know there's more.
I would suspect there's at least 500 to 2,000 in every field office.
So the hub of most of this will be at the History Center in Oklahoma City.
Yes. They take ownership of all the photos. They archive them, so the original photos will be archived in their basement. But the main thing is they'll be available electronically, and if somebody wants a photo, you can get them downloaded to a real high resolution to get a better photo than what the original was. So that's been a nice.
That's been, yes.
Nice little project.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see all that come together too.
So I think between the oral histories and the photo documentation, we're working toward collecting and preserving this conservation history in Oklahoma.
I'm thinking in 50 years you can speak to. I mean, you said you had 50 years of experience from start to.
Yeah, I went back last night and looked. And our agency was formed, SCS was formed in 1935. And since 1935, the agency has had 17 chiefs or administrators. And from the time I started, I have worked under 15 of those 17.
Wow.
And during that same period of time, there were 14 presidents from 1935 to the present. And I've worked under 10 of those. And there were 23 Secretary of Agricultures during that period of time since 1935, and I've worked under 18 of those. And in Oklahoma, there's been 12 state conservationists, and I've worked under seven of those, starting with Roland Willis.
You've seen a lot of changes then.
A lot of changes.
What in your mind are some of the bigger ones? Computers, I know.
Oh, technology-wise, it just changed the whole outlook. And the farm bills have changed the whole atmosphere a lot. But it still comes down to the one-on-one relationships, going out and working on the land with landowners and operators to get conservation on the land. And that one-on-one relationship never changes. That's needed regardless. This is a voluntary program, and they need to understand what needs to be done and why, and how to design them and how to maintain them and all. And that's the basis for all of this, whether it was done back in the 50s or whether it was done last week.
Well, the environment of the agency has changed somewhat.
Considerably.
From early days till.
And part of it was just sheer number of employees. In Oklahoma, there was over 600 employees in Oklahoma.
When you started?
No, that was in the 50s and 60s during the heydays. But now it's down to, I don't even know what it is now, 200 or so. Nationwide was over 15,000 at one point in time. Now it's around 8,600. But a lot of that was technology. To get a survey, you'd have to have a 4 or 5 man survey crew out there to get surveys. Now you can do it with LiDAR. You can do it just with the satellites that go over, and we have the topographic maps already here. So technology has changed a lot. But still, it comes down to that one-on-one. And I think that's one of the challenges looking ahead, too. We've got some very smart people, some very smart, technically, employees. But it comes down to the communication piece is what it takes to really, you can know everything there is to know about something, but if you can't communicate to that somebody, it's going to be a real challenge. And I think that's one of the challenges we have looking ahead. And also before, almost everyone who came on board had an ag background, and that's not the case anymore. So that puts them at a disadvantage talking with producers and farmers out there. So, but you know, when you look back at the challenges of the 40s and 50s, it was must have looked insurmountable at that time. and they met that challenge. And I'm sure this generation will too. There's always, every generation is going to have their own challenges and their own issues to deal with. But done it in the past, and we'll do it in the next generation too.
Well, do you have an opinion between appointed and career chief?
I don't know. I wasn't real quick to adapt because I really thought that a technical agency like SCS at the time really needed to have a technical person, career person. But Peter Myers was the first appointed chief, and we were very fortunate that that was the first one. He was very, very good. He was a farmer. He was very good with people. But what he added to the outfit was that political connection. He could work with the administration. He could work with Congress and all that we didn't have on their career people. So like anybody in any position, there's going to be some people that are better than others. We've had some really excellent chiefs, and we had some that were, I'd say, were kind of marginal. But we make it through all of them. My own personal experience, I've worked with a lot of people, and you learn something from everyone you work with. And I think that's just part of life. But we've seen them go high and low.
Well, and in over your years of service too, you've seen more women come on board.
Much, yes.
And diversity in general, not just women, but.
And I think that's society in general too. That you wouldn't have expected that in the 50s, but now that's a part of life. And I think some of the women and minorities are going to be some of the best leaders we have.
Well, you mentioned you had a regional that was a lady.
Judy Johnson, yes, and she was back at that time when that was not real well known. She started out in Iowa as a RC&D coordinator, and then she worked her way up through the system. And I would put her up against any one of the other regional conservationists then or even now. That she got the job done.
Were there very many in your class at Iowa that were in your engineering classes? Very many women?
No.
No, it was ag engineering.
In ag engineering at Iowa State, there weren't any.
Do you still have your postcard? That postcard?
I think I do. I'm not known for throwing much stuff away. It's not a matter of if I got it. It's just a matter of where the devil is it.
I'm thinking that little one item set you on your course.
Yes.
And
yeah, and you just look through your career. There's so many of those little things. That was a bigger one, but there's so many little things that if that one thing wouldn't have happened, if Carolyn wouldn't have been working that day as a part-time clerk in that office, I mean, there's just so many things that just happened.
Well, I guess the card wouldn't have come if your buddies hadn't been up, if 10 others in your class weren't going to that particular university.
Yeah. And when I look back, that wasn't a very good reason to pick a university, wasn't it? Thinking they must know something more than I do.
How far was it from home?
About the same. About 2.5 hours either way. But it was a good decision. Iowa State has a very, very good engineering program, but it was small enough for all the professors. You knew everyone. They would have you over to their house for ice cream, and they'd have functions going on every month. So it was really a neat program that way.
Did either one of your children go into similar type work?
Not in agriculture. Older daughter is a chemical engineer here at OSU. She's working at Williams Company. She's moved her way up. She's a vice president of Williams now. Our other daughter went to seminary, and she's now the director of Christian education at our church here in Stillwater. So,
well, they would go back to your parents' home on the farm and had some experience with ag, or not so
no,
much?
They were much. No. My father passed away in 1981,
okay.
And our youngest daughter was born in 1980. So yeah, they didn't have that experience other than just going back, and we've taken them back to the neighborhood, and they've heard all the stories that are probably kind of boring to them as we drive through the neighborhood, and also.
Is your brother still in farming?
He went into veterinary school at Iowa State, and he was a veterinary practice up in Minnesota, and now he's still working with a pork production firm up there. So
ag related in a sense.
Exactly.
And your sister?
She was a nurse, and she was in Sioux City, and she's been in Waterloo for many years. She retired a couple 3 years ago. So I I keep hearing how cold it is and how bad the winters are in Mankato, and I keep telling my brother I don't have any sympathy. Oh, he knew what he was getting into going north. At least I was smart enough to go south.
And Arkansas, you got close to Arkansas.
Oh yeah, and it's
So you
easy.
don't have to go too far to see her side of the family.
And every March on spring break for 40 some years now, we go over. The whole family goes over for a week at the racetrack at Oak Lawn and get a place to stay over there. So that's just part of the ritual. We've been doing that for 40 years. So you think after 40 some years you'd figure out the system and come back with more money once in a while than you went, but
You know,
next year is the year.
you just know how much you can spend and not
Yeah.
leave the rest of it here.
It's hard to lose too much money when you're betting $2 show tickets on the favorite. So.
And you started in this building where we are,
Mhm.
right? And you still have an office in this building.
Same place.
When do you plan to walk out for the last?
If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said maybe a couple months. It's just taken longer. Part of it is I'm cleaning up a lot of this stuff. I got that Watershed Facts and Figures document done.
Yeah.
We're cleaning up an awful lot of things. The one big thing I got left is going through the office. I got 35 years of accumulation of stuff in that office, and 3/4 of it could probably pitch, but there's a lot of history there. And we're looking next year will be the 20th anniversary of the signing of the rehab legislation. And we have a couple national ensuring meetings that might highlight that next year. And working with Congressman Lucas, he might be the keynote for those. And Doug McCaleb and I are putting together a paper on the history of the rehab legislation and what it took to get it. And so we have that piece captured. So that'll be the next little project here. So, and Gary's been so nice to keep the office available. And
So it's become more of a hobby.
oh yeah, last 10 years I've only been doing the fun stuff, and it makes a big difference. When I retired from NRCS, you no longer have any of the personnel stuff, the administrative, the budget, and you just work on those projects you always wanted to work on, but you couldn't because you had all that other stuff going on. And working with some great people. Lil Holcomb, who's been secretary, we've worked together for 25 years now. She was part of that part-time team. Dwayne Phillips was public affairs specialist. He was part of that part-time team. Jim Hanley is one of the best GIS specialists around on doing all the GIS work. Ray Riley had 45 years as a hydrologist with their agency. He was here in Oklahoma, started here with all the hydrology work here. We were all retired. We were all working part-time, very flexible schedules. We'd work when we wanted to and not when we didn't. And I mean, it was really a good opportunity for us. We did a lot of assessments. We prepared a lot of emergency action plans. We just did a lot of things that I don't think would have happened had we not come on. So it was a win-win deal for everybody.
Yeah, the citizens of Oklahoma benefit ultimately too
from
all of that.
Yes,
Years
I
and
hope
years
so.
of experience and knowledge.
And we've got all of that, a lot of it documented now. So it's in a place where future generations can hopefully pull it out and make some sense out of it and go from there.
We've covered a lot. Is there anything we haven't?
I think that's about all we have.
Do you have a highlight? And if you think back over, is there one or two things that just you're most proud of, or?
Oh, I think the experience in DC working on the Hill was such a unique experience that few people get, and just being in the hearings. And
Did anything surprise you?
oh my gosh, yes. I told Doug McCaleb, and he would laugh. I told him I thought I'd taken 5th grade civics. I know what it takes to get a law passed. You've been through all of that, but it was so much different. Reality hits you in the face there when you get involved in all the politics and all the stuff there. But just being in those hearings and seeing some of the senators and representatives that you see on TV and having them talk about the Watershed program, and that was such a neat experience. And working with the chiefs directly.
Pinch you to make sure it's not a dream.
I mean, that was very unique. And then besides the local projects like Boomer Dam, that'll always be the rehab project out there at Cheyenne, and the Cordell celebration, and all these national efforts that we've had, and working with some of the leadership of these national organizations.
Do you go back and see some of these sites that you worked on?
Yes. when the kids were little, oh my gosh, here we go again. But I still want to, I don't get up to Iowa very often, but when I do, I always want to go out and see how that waterway's doing. That was one of the very first ones, the first month I was on the job. I thought that was so neat to run some survey equipment and that was.
And you notice changes, I guess, too, like you were saying, lots built up around them.
Yes,
some of the bigger
a lot.
changes that you've seen.
Or up there, what used to have, we had neighbors about every quarter mile, and now most of those farmsteads are gone and farm right over them, larger farms. And it's kind of sad. It's a whole way of life that's been lost there because everybody relied on each other, and you knew all the other kids and the families around you just like your own family, and all the potluck suppers and all the card parties and all. It was just one big family that helped each other out, and because not everybody had all the equipment and you couldn't afford to hire the labor, so everybody just shares back and forth. I thought the whole world was like that. I didn't realize until we got down to college that was really unique. There was a club up there. It was called Know Your Neighbor Club, KYN, and all through my childhood and got into college, once a month they'd go have KYN. They'd go to the neighborhood club, and it used to be we'd have potluck suppers and a lot of that. Well, here about 10 years ago, I noticed my mother looked on her calendar. She had KYN, and I said, "Surely that's not the same organization." And she said, "Well, yeah. Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't we keep going?" It's down to about 7 people at that time. And I said, "Well, did you all start it?" And she said, "Oh, heavens no." She said, "When we moved up here in 1950, we were the second generation who started it." There's such a story there, I think, and I found the person who had the records on who was the first generation and second generation. It started back in the 30s up there.
Wow.
And it continued on, and I think they had their last get together last year. They met they'd play cards, and they'd meet in a nursing home, because that's where most of the people were. But I think they've stopped doing it now. But that started in the 30s and went through just last year or two.
What a legacy too. That yeah. And she was the one that worked in the hospital. No, your grandmother.
That was my grandmother.
Worked in the sewing.
Yeah.
That's unusual. I mean, I don't know much about that either, but
yeah. And imagine that was through the Depression years, and as a single woman raising 3 young kids. My dad was 5 years old, and he was the oldest. And
strong woman.
She raised those kids through. They never had much money, and my mother certainly didn't. They just went from rent house to rent house.
Were her parents nearby? Your grandmother's parents close by? I mean, to help. Do you know?
Yeah, she was there for a while.
I had a little bit.
A little bit.
A little.
But she was the youngest, so those parents were pretty old. In her family, she had 10 brothers and sisters. There's 5 sisters and 5 brothers. And we do a lot of genealogy, but I pieced it all together where the oldest of the males died when they were 62 years old. The rest were 62 or younger. And the oldest of the females was 102. And the youngest of the females was like 84.
Wow.
So all the males died before 62, and all the females went into their 90s and 100s. I don't know if there's some genetics there or what involved.
Working really hard in the fields.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Could be.
Part of it.
Can be.
Oh, well. You have had a fascinating life.
This has been good. I've been very fortunate to have the career. Never would have dreamt.
And it's okay to be called the old damn man.
Oh, yeah.
Just the old, not necessarily old, just the damn man.
Yeah, I just ask everybody to get those words in the right order. If you change the order, it changes the meaning entirely. The damn old man just doesn't have the same same feel. It's been a good career, good life. Life is good.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us today. It's been great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome.